Welcome to the EBPOT podcast with your host, Kim Griffin. Welcome to the EBPOT podcast, where I help you stay up to date with current research in paediatric OT. My name is Kim Griffin. I'm a paediatric OT and your host. Thanks for listening today. Our topic will be handwriting. I have 3 articles for you. These were the articles that I actually released in my initial draft of the podcast. So if you have been a subscriber since before the podcast was actually formally released, you know exactly who you are. And I say a huge thank you for supporting me with my initial idea and for giving me feedback if you did give me feedback. You might have already heard this episode. For those new listeners, welcome, and I hope you take away some practical evidence and advice. If you're enjoying the podcast and finding it helpful, you can sign up to receive the show notes via email each fortnight. The link to do this is on the ebpot.com website and also in the episode notes below. The first article was published in the Journal of Occupational Therapy Schools and Early Intervention by Kunster and colleagues, and it is titled "Handwriting Legibility is Related to Spelling Level, but Not to Reading and Spelling Progress." The paper was published online in July 2024 and more recently in the print edition. The paper presents results from 3 different studies conducted in the Netherlands. The overarching theme is how handwriting difficulties, particularly handwriting legibility, interact with spelling difficulties and dyslexia. In the first study, they confirmed what many of us might observe, that children with dyslexia do frequently experience difficulties with legibility of handwriting compared to their peers without dyslexia. Just as a note, they used parents' rating of handwriting legibility to determine handwriting difficulties, so they didn't use a specific handwriting assessment. However, their sample size was quite large. There were a total of 636 children, with over 300 children in each group, so the group that they determined had dyslexia and the group that they didn't. They also found that boys more often than girls struggled with handwriting legibility. This is something I've always seen in clinical practice, and I'm sure that's not a surprise to the paediatric occupational therapists who are listening. The second study explored how reading and spelling of the 311 dyslexic children in study 2 linked to their parents' rating of handwriting legibility, and the study found a clear connection between handwriting legibility and spelling level in the children with dyslexia. So that meant if the child's handwriting was difficult to read, their spelling score was also significantly lower, suggesting that relationship between handwriting legibility and spelling proficiency. However, they did not find a significant relationship between handwriting legibility and reading level. The authors suggested that as reading skills advance, handwriting becomes less critical for reading fluency, so it's less required, but it remains very important for spelling practice and spelling ability. In the third study, they did a dyslexia intervention, and they were trying to understand whether the handwriting legibility difficulties would impact the outcomes of the dyslexia intervention. So 249 of the children from study 2, so this is sort of progressive. They started with a large group, they've gone down to just the dyslexic children, and then they've gone down to the children who joined in the study. So there were 249 of them that chose to participate. The intervention targeted reading and spelling skills using the protocol, dyslexia diagnostics, and remediation intervention. This intervention was quite intense. The children received weekly 45-minute sessions with a reading specialist and homework that they needed to complete 4 times a week over a period of 3 months. The study investigated whether poor handwriting legibility hindered progress in reading and spelling during the dyslexia intervention. The researchers found that all participants improved both their reading and spelling scores, regardless of their handwriting legibility challenges. There was no difference between the groups in reading scores post the intervention, indicating that the handwriting difficulties didn't really affect reading intervention response. Whilst the spelling results improved for all children post-intervention, the children who often had poor handwriting legibility scored significantly lower than those who never did, and the group rated as having poor handwriting legibility sometimes fell in between those that often had and never did have. So what this means is the dyslexia intervention worked for reading regardless of handwriting ability, but for spelling, frequent handwriting difficulties created a persistent gap, and these children improved but still remained behind their peers. So the question for us as clinical OTs is, should we really be doing more advocacy for addressing handwriting legibility if a child is involved in a literacy intervention to help support their spelling skills, as the handwriting legibility challenges seem to create an additional barrier for spelling success? Just a reminder of the live journal clubs that I'm also running as part of the EBPOT podcast. The first one's coming up on January the 27th, and the second is on the 28th of April. In January, we're looking at an article from the Design Journal, which is considering sensory environmental adaptations from the perspective of architects. And I think you need to see it to fully understand it. This is why I've chosen it to be a journal club article rather than presenting it on the podcast. The booking links are in the show notes and on the EBPOT website under Journal Clubs. Donica has published an article called The Relationship Between Sensory Integration and Handwriting Skills, Underlying Factors That Impact Handwriting, in the Journal of Occupational Therapy Schools and Early Intervention in August 2025. This article used the handwriting legibility scale and the evaluation of Ayres sensory integration, or the EASY for those who are familiar with it, to evaluate how sensory integration abilities impact handwriting. The study included 33 children. These children were chosen before the tests were administered, and as a result, there were only 6 children in the handwriting difficulty group and 27 children with average scores on the handwriting legibility scale. Most of the children in the handwriting difficulty group had scores lower than 1 standard deviation from the mean on the EASY. However, I will pause here to highlight the data presentation. The researcher has used percentages to show the number of children scoring below the mean on the EASY tests. Given the difference in the group sizes, so 6 versus 27, and the small number in the handwriting difficulty group, the percentages probably make the differences look more dramatic than they actually are, as one child in the handwriting difficulty group represents 17% of the sample. So if you're reading the article, just be mindful that the percentages can be quite deceiving. The tests on the EASY with the largest differences between the two groups were the tactile perception of designs, praxis and sequencing, tactile perception and localization, praxis positions, ocular motor, ocular praxis, and bilateral integration. For those not familiar with the EASY, it's quite similar to the SIPT, which was Ayres's second assessment of sensory integration difficulties. And each of the subtests are done separately. And essentially, the tests that look at touch processing, praxis, sequencing and copying positions, and then the tests linked to eye movements and bilateral integration were the ones that scored with the biggest effect size. They all had a medium effect size. And again, I will just say, whilst these may look impressive, we need to be cautious. With only 6 children in the handwriting difficulty group, just one child with particularly severe difficulties could be driving these entire results. So the statistics might look initially robust, but they're actually quite fragile given the tiny sample size. We're essentially making conclusions about the links between sensory integration difficulties as measured on the EASY and handwriting difficulties using data from 6, so half a dozen children. It was interesting to me that the mean scores on 2 of the EASY tests, the tactile perception of designs and praxis and sequencing, were also over 1 standard deviation below the mean for the non-handwriting difficulty group, which raises some questions of the validity of these subtests, that is, whether they are measuring what they suggest they're measuring or if there's potentially an issue with the normative sample. This study recommended that we should be looking at underlying sensory patterns to support handwriting. However, I will acknowledge this perspective within the broader ongoing debate in our field. There is substantial research suggesting that if we want to improve handwriting, we need to work directly on handwriting skills using functional task-specific approaches rather than focusing on underlying components. My goal with this podcast isn't to dismiss any particular approach, but rather to keep you informed about all of the research that is being published so you can make your own evidence-informed decisions within your practice. I think it's important that we acknowledge these different perspectives exist and continue to critically evaluate the evidence as it emerges. You can also subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast app like Spotify or Apple, and this will download new episodes directly to your phone. Subscribing to both lets me know that you're listening and keeps me motivated to continue producing the show. Thank you to everybody who's already subscribed. If you have any feedback, you can let me know by emailing ebpot@griffinot.com or by hitting reply to the membership email if you're already subscribed. Now I'm going to explore a paper entitled An Action Research Project about how to improve the support primary school teachers of children who are delayed in their readiness to write. It's from Parkinson's and team, and it was published in the British Journal of Occupational Therapy in August 2025. This study aimed to understand what early career teachers or teachers within their first 2 years after qualification in the UK know about handwriting and supporting handwriting development in children who have difficulties. The study received questionnaires from 124 early career teachers and completed focus groups with 6 early career teachers in Kent, which is a county in the southeast of England, just to the bottom right of London on the map. Overall, the results of the questionnaire indicated that teachers, who I'm assuming trained in the UK, received very little information on handwriting during their training. Over 80% of the 124 teachers reported that they did not receive training on handwriting development, handwriting prerequisites, or how to identify if the children have handwriting difficulties. A whopping 98.3%, so pretty much all of the teachers, indicated they did not receive any instruction regarding which handwriting programs could support children with difficulties. Essentially, the survey indicated that teachers get very little information on handwriting in their training, and there is a role for occupational therapists to support them with this. We might also need to adjust our thinking, given that handwriting is such a big part of school. It's valid for us to assume that teachers received some training on this, but this study provides evidence that they do not. So we might need to explore some of the more fundamental basics with teachers regarding handwriting development in a way that we might not have thought that we needed to. The areas that teachers reported they would like more support and training in were how to support handwriting difficulties, expectations for each year group, how to support pencil grasp development, how to improve fine motor skills, reasons or barriers to handwriting development, and strategies for supporting letter formation. The focus group explored feedback from 6 teachers who attended a workshop that was run by the occupational therapist to try and cover some of those knowledge gaps that they identified in the questionnaire. 3 themes were identified following the focus groups, and these aligned with the questionnaire results. Firstly, teachers reported they realised how much they didn't know following the workshop, so essentially it opened their eyes to sort of the broader components of handwriting and how to support handwriting needs. Secondly, they realised they needed to understand pre-writing stages of development in order to teach handwriting. Thirdly, the more in-depth understanding of how and why handwriting difficulties occur and the available interventions to support was reported as helpful following the training, as teachers felt more equipped to support children with handwriting difficulties. From an OT perspective, the study suggests that there are gaps in teachers' handwriting knowledge and that OTs play a role in providing training to teachers to help them to understand when children are ready to start working on letter formations, and also how to help these children with some of the more pre-writing skills and also then handwriting when they are not. Once again, thanks for listening today. If you would like the show notes or to join one of the live journal clubs, head over to EBPOT.com. I want to reach as many paediatric OTs as I can, so please do share the link to the podcast with your network of paediatric OTs. And next week, I'll be exploring a couple of articles looking at DCD. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and I'll see you next episode. This podcast provides educational commentary and analysis of recent research for continuing professional development. All studies are properly cited and used under the fair use provisions for educational purposes. Listeners should consult the original sources for complete study details.